So here we are, as part of World Piano Day 2021 celebrations. This is the World Piano 88 event, and this section of the day is focusing on a subject really close to my heart. So what sometimes people find bizarre is, whilst I make my name as a professional piano player and choir musical director, my heart is just full of the love of extreme heavy metal. In fact, I've even got a PhD in it, but that's a story for another day. Right now, I want to introduce a couple of musicians who play in some music that I'm a big fan of, a style of music that is a particular kind of extreme metal that we're going to talk about. And we're going to talk about a subject under the heading of can depressing, and I use the word depressing very much in virtual quote marks, can depressing music be positive for our mental health? And I hope that you're going to really enjoy this discussion. So first up, to introduce onto the screen and onto the recording, is a guy called Kostas Panagiotou. He lives in Wales, and he is the main man behind the Greek funeral doom band Pantheist. So Kostas, welcome to you. Hello.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me here. I'm Greek originally, but the band started in Belgium, by the way, and now it's in the UK, but it doesn't matter. It has a Greek soul, so that's all good.
Your international legend is secure, don't worry. And to join us on this discussion is a man from a band who has cost me a significant amount in vinyl purchases in my life, from the American funeral doom band Evoken, who very much can be assured are legends in this scene. Keyboard player Don Zaros. Don, welcome all the way from Long Island in America.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It was a dramatic delay of arrival there from Don. So Kostas is going to lead our discussion under the title of Can Depressing Music Be Positive for Our Mental Health? So Kostas, over to you.
Yes, lovely. So thanks again, Mark, for moderating this whole day. I think it's really important to talk about music and mental health, but also about the various aspects of music. And I know that the piano is central to that, and we're going to touch into it. But generally speaking, I always find it a very fascinating topic, so this link between music and mental health. And I always think, it kind of centers on, the more mainstream types of music. So it's great to have that conversation where we're involving, sort of music that most people will find a bit dark, a bit weird, a bit different. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. So first of all, this is a conversation about depressing music, if you like. You're going to hear my view about it later. I don't think there's not such a thing as depressing music. Spoiler. But for now, I just really want to hear a little bit more from both of you, actually. I'm quite interested to hear what draws you into this type of dark music, I guess. Maybe I can start myself by telling a little bit about my experience of what got me into it. So I always felt a sort of need to connect with the feelings of nostalgia, feelings of sadness, that sort of stuff in life that sometimes we tend to label as negative, but they are really part of our day-to-day experience of life. So I was always drawn to the more melancholic music. Personally, I find it has more depth than most upbeat music I know. In my head, and as my personal bias, uplifting, happy music is superficial, because it's there to make you dance and to feel good, but in a sort of generally in a not very deep way. That's just my bias. I know that. So I always felt melancholy music and what people call depressing music has more depth to it, perhaps more dimension. There's almost like an existential element to it. But I would love to hear from both of you what got you into the sort of darker sides of music. And let's start with you, Don. So I'm just curious to know I know you have your own band, Marshmallow Bunnies, which is very atmospheric. I wouldn't say it's necessarily depressing music, but Evoken is, I don't know, even if I compare Pantheist to Evoken, I think we are probably relatively happy-go-lucky. So what got you into, in such a kind of dark, slow, brooding band in the first place?
Well, I wasn't really into... I was into doom, but I wasn't really submerged into it really until I got in the band of Evoken. But I've always liked. I think we're very similar. I always felt a connection with the more, you'd say, we're piano players, so minor keys and everything. Just something like if you're playing major keys, it's nice, but I feel like I'm like not zoning in on certain feelings that are a little more inside of me. You know, I'm just, I don't know if that makes any sense, but just kind of like, I feel like it's more expressive. And I feel like I'm confronting things more on a deeper level when I get into the more minor and darker things. And I'm not, you know, like you said, everybody can be happy and, everything's fun and everything with the happy music. But it's just, I'm drawn to the emotion, like, and I don't know if that has anything to do with my upbringing. I had a difficult upbringing, and sometimes we're a little more connected with that stuff. And, and sometimes you try to backlash and go away from it because of that. But I don't know. I have to kind of embrace it. And I don't know. It's something, I don't know. That's kind of like how I feel towards it. I've always been drawn to it. And yeah, both bands and so anything I do, I try to, some things aren't as oppressive or anything that I write, but I always try to get into the darker, the minor keys and the dissonance, but always a little bit of light in there. I always try to throw a little light in there. I don't want it to be so. A lot of people I deal with and I hang around with, I'm more into the aggressive side, and I don't get it. I don't get it. Like, I'm not that, I don't connect with that aggression. Like, I don't feel it really with doom aggression for some reason, even if it gets heavy as hell. It doesn't, I don't connect that way.
That's a very interesting comment there, Don, in terms of the aggression and lack of aggression in doom, and I agree with you. There is a band I want to bring up as an example today for how people, I guess, will look into the funeral doom genre. A band which I'm sure you heard of called Los, American funeral doom band, and yeah, that's for me a typical example of a band. There's barely any aggression to it, isn't it? It's just like it doesn't even have really heavy guitars. I mean, we talk often about heaviness in the genre. We mean these low, distorted guitars with a lot of volume. But in their case, for instance, it's not even that loud. It's just more the melodies are kind of downbeat and really captivate. And of course, with song titles like "Cut Up, Depressed and Alone," you just know what to expect from them. We'll go to that later. I want to hear first from Mark about what you into sort of the dark music, because I know, just like Don and I, you have a quite eclectic music taste. You don't just listen to or play dark music, you play all sorts of genres. But you are in a black metal band, which for most people is aggressive and dark. And I know that you have a funeral doom band. I haven't heard it yet, but being a funeral doom band, I'm sure it's not upbeat music, is it?
No, it's not. When I sorted the track, the BPMs out for the recording session for the Ard album, which is my Doom project, I was amused to see that I think the fastest song was 74 BPM. So I was like, yeah, that's almost too quick. Let's slow some things down. But no, I think one of the things that's interesting for me is that I mean, I first, I guess, like a lot of people who were into rock music, got into rock and metal music when I was a teenager and was first drawn to, the sort of classic bands, the Metallicas and the Megadeths and I guess like bands like Anthrax and so on. And I guess the aggression was a big part of it. And maybe, when you're a teenager, that kind of plays a part of it. That kind of plays a part of the appeal, it's kind of the impressive and, this'll cheese my parents off or whatever it is. And those bands are still very, very special to me. A lot of those bands will for always be in high up my sort of favorite lists of all time. They'll always hold a special place in my heart. But what was really interesting to me when I started to get into some of the slower stuff, which only came, some years later, I don't even know who the first band was of that ilk. I mean, sort of heading in that direction, maybe something like Opeth, where, it's not funeral doom. Of course it's not, but it's starting to head towards that sort of slower, more melancholic kind of feel in some of their material. I think as I started to head towards that, I started to feel like there was an extra sort of, I guess, emotional weight to some of the sounds. But I guess I came into the really slow stuff via bands like Cult of Luna and Isis. So that was now sort of in the early 2000s, perhaps later than some of you guys. And then when I first heard Cult of Luna, which was, I'd guess might have been sort of around 2001-ish, it was the weight of the sound that really got me, and particularly seeing them live. So I saw a gig where Isis were touring and Cult of Luna were the support, and that was quite early in both those bands' careers. And I remember seeing that live and being really struck by just the power of the chord change. Like you could feel the chord change, and that seemed to add something extra for me. That when a chord really landed, there was that kind of primal feel to it. And even though, particularly as both those bands' careers went on, there was certainly an increasing element of what you might call melodic aspects and so on. At the core of it, it was, everything happened slowly, but when it did, it just landed. And I really felt that, and certainly in a live environment. But I felt, but those particular bands, I think, carried that into their recording career as well. And I think an early sort of more sort of the death doom kind of band that were important to me and will always be. I'm a huge fan of the Finnish band Swallow the Sun, which I know in Funeral Doom land are still quite a sort of melodic aspect. But again, just the production is just huge, and I think that is a really important aspect of the appeal to the Funeral Doom, is that there's a weight behind it in the production, in the speed. But as Don says, when something beautiful happens at that slower speed, it's just like heartbreaking. These little beautiful melodies will just suddenly appear from the weight, and it's that contrast that I think is really important to me. So yeah, I guess I know people who are into bands like Evoken and so on may not necessarily arrive in that genre as fans in the same path that I did, but I feel like I quite easily and deeply connected to the feel behind that style, even though I was hearing it in perhaps slightly different bands. It's definitely the weight of the chord change, the weight of the emotion. That's what really appeals to me in the funeral doom genre, and then the fact that we can combine it with these really ethereal, heartbreaking melodies is really powerful to me. So I haven't stopped loving the fast stuff. I had Nazem on vinyl today, but so it's not like I've stopped loving the fast stuff, but when I want that emotion, that's what appeals to me in Funeral Doom. It's just crushing when it happens and really beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the point you brought there about the weight of the music, the power of the music, is a really important one. For instance, talking about Evoken, the first time, I mean, both of the times I saw them, I experienced it, and I think they're one of the heaviest sonically bands that I've seen and heard in the genre. First time we played with them, the second time with Don in the band in London. I think it was 2013 or maybe around that time. So for me, which brings me to the next point I want to make, this about it's some sort of cathartic experience, really, more than anything else. I mean, doom music is not really, especially funeral doom, it's not really music to make you dance, and it's not. It doesn't even have like a steady beat that is natural to us. I think probably to get a natural sort of body rhythm type of beat, you probably need to have at least 90 beats per minute or 120 beats per minute even for people to start feeling some sort of pulse, really. And we're talking here about a genre that plays between 40 and 60 beats per minute, regularly. So it doesn't really have that sort of appeal, but it is more about the sonic weight, and there's something cathartic about it. I don't know what you think about that idea, Don. Is it about catharsis, doom? Is it? I mean, often they speak about there's an apocalyptic element to doom, isn't it? As a lot of people say, it's about it gives you an apocalyptic feel. What sort of feeling does it give you, specifically playing, not just listening, but playing this type of music?
Playing, yeah. I have to say, like on stage, it's hard for me, like, because this type of music, I really get wrapped up in the emotion of it all, and when I'm on stage, I gotta focus because I can watch my drummer. And my drummer is amazing. Vince Verkay, he's incredible. And just sometimes I don't know if he knows this, but sometimes I watch him play while we're playing, and I just like, whoa, because it's just like I can feel it. I mean, when it started breaking into a happy song, I can feel the earth move a little. And it's just like, oh, it's just, I don't know. It's exciting to be up there and to feel it and to be immersed in it. And yeah, it is definitely a catharsis. But and it's hard though. I'd rather sometimes just be in the audience so I can just enjoy it and not worry about being in beat, because obviously at this slow tempo, you can easily go off because you can't find. It's not easy to find yourself back in the beat. So yeah, so it definitely is, as a listener or being in the band, it definitely is it definitely, like, just to sound basic, just like after work, stressful day, something that loud and that expansive can really do wonders for how I feel, make me feel better. So even if it sounds negative and whatever people want to pin on it, it's not to me.
I don't know if you
and
guys...
I don't focus. Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead. Oh, no, I was just saying, even if I don't tend to really focus on the lyrics that much. Because if I did, I probably would get depressed. So I really don't want to. A lot of, and if it's a band that I know that the lyrics are a little bit more abstract and don't, aren't saying, saying violent things or something, that, it's just art, first of all, let's put that out there. But if, I'll focus more on the lyrics that are a little more and read them through more if they're a little less, like some of the death metal vocals and things, like sometimes the lyrics can get very, like, not anything that I have a connection with. So basically I like a lot of bands that I like the music, but I don't like the lyrics. And if I don't agree with what they usually talk about, I don't partake in it. I focus on what makes me feel good.
Well, the good news, Don, is the good news is that you can understand most of the lyrics in our genre anyway, because of this vocal style that that we apply, isn't it? The so-called death grunt, which for people who are not familiar, I don't know how to describe it, but it's a little bit like if you heard these Buddhist chants, like going really low, it binds that really loud, amplified, and sustained, and that's what we call a death grunt. And actually, it's true that the lyrics are not so easy to decipher anyway. So if you don't like them, you can easily ignore them, can't you? So
I was going to ask if you guys have ever seen the band Earth play live, because whilst they're not necessarily a funeral doom band, of course, and indeed the second half of their career has been almost, Americana influenced. It's like very, very tranquil in many ways. They still operate at these very slow speeds. And what Don was talking about the difficulty of staying in time live, I don't know if you've ever noticed what the drummer of Earth does live, in that she beats the air to keep herself in time. So she'll like go, bang, tick, tick, bang, tick. And she just beats the air to keep herself in time, which I thought was really resourceful and creative.
I can see that in front of me. Yeah, that's great, excellent. So I mean, both of you are musicians as much as really avid music lovers. So I'm just really curious. I mean, do you think there is a difference when, in terms of the discussion we're having about whether music has that effect of making you perhaps sad or depressed? Do you think, as a musician, as a music player, you can actually get in a state where you feel sad or depressed? What do you think?
Mark, I'm going to take that one this time.
Can you get sad or depressed by playing the music? You would like the actual act of playing it, do you mean? As opposed to listening
to the piano. If you sit on the piano, have you ever thought, oh God, I'm really depressed now playing this track?
No. I don't think I've ever had that experience. I've been moved sometimes. Like I think you can, but I think I was having this discussion yesterday with someone that when I get moved by music, it tends to be something because of a reason that is connected to me personally, that something is going on at that time, and I'm relating in some way or interpreting some way what I'm hearing as in some way having a connection or an effect on what I'm currently experiencing personally. And if I'm playing it, that I sometimes feel that. But what I don't often feel is that I don't often feel that as a listener. If I'm just listening, I love the music. I can wax lyrical about 500 bands without thinking about it. But I don't necessarily get emotional as such. I enjoy it, and I can just bathe in the moment, but I don't necessarily feel moved. But if I'm playing something that I have a connection with, then sometimes that I can find that more moving. I don't know what Don feels about
that. As far as emotion, like if I got like moved by something on stage and started really feeling it, I may get distracted by rhythm, and I can't get too attached to feeling emotional about it. You know what I mean? Not like I feel emotions, but like getting melancholy, because then I start thinking about things and then I can't focus on music. I don't know. Maybe it's just like it's something wrong with the way I perform or that play. I can't do two things at once. But the only thing that I do feel, and this is not, and I do this, and I told the band this, like some of the angry passages sounding like sometimes me and Kostas and I probably can relate to this. I don't know how you feel about it, Mark, but I'm a strict vegan, and a lot of the aggression I channel on stage. Like if there's any aggression, like if I'm feeling the beat that Vince is playing, or my drummer, my bassist, Dave is, going heavy on the bass. I think of the animals, and I think of because to me, I just don't understand why the world isn't vegan. I want to go in another category because, people care about dogs and cats, but forget about the other animals. I love animals, but they don't. And I channel that, I know that sounds strange, but like the aggression, I think of I just don't understand why people are a tunnel vision about this. Cats and dogs are okay. You can't do nothing to them, but all animals else. I'm an animal lover. I love all animals, but no, you don't. You like cats and dogs. So I know that sounds like pretty obscure reference there, kind of going off on the edge, but
really interesting draw how you bring in an emotional connection to something unrelated into the music.
That's it, because I don't really have an aggressive side to me, but that gets me angry. It gets me angry because to me, in my mind, how can you be loving all animals and letting all of what happens to animals in factory farms happen? It doesn't make sense. And so whatever. But that's the only emotion. Otherwise I'm focused on what I'm doing because I try to give my best performance. And if I get lost in my emotions, I may go off musically, and that's not good for nobody.
I wanted to ask both of you a question because my experience of recording and playing Funeral Doom stuff is, I guess, really related to my art project, which I just recorded at the end of last year. That was kind of the first Doom project I'd ever sort of committed to tape, and essentially it was me with some assistants and musicians. So I don't have the live experience of performing that kind of style of music, although I have the live experience of witnessing and listening to. But one of we're all keyboard players here. And so one of the things that interests me is that we hinted on before is this sort of contrast between the aggression and the quote unquote depressive nature of this heavy style of music. And commonly, of course, the keyboards are one of the main instruments that's used to introduce the elements of beauty, or introduce the elements of more, the prettier side of Funeral Doom and the more melancholic style. So I wondered what you guys feel, in the context of what we're talking about here at World Piano Day, how you guys feel about the role of keyboards within a depressing or an aggressive style of music. Because, of course, if you look at it in terms of other areas of heavy metal music and extreme metal music, sometimes keyboards are really frowned upon. How many bands have we seen sort of proudly declare there are no keyboards on this record, because that's a poser instrument. And in metal and in some styles of metal, that is bonus points ticked. Whereas, of course, in Funeral Doom, keyboards are way more commonly part of it. You think of stuff like Skepticism with a really focal use of the pipe organ. So I'm kind of curious as to how you feel about being the keyboard players or piano players who are responsible for delivering the sort of the prettier end of a really aggressive style of music. How do you feel about your role within creating the sound? I was just curious for both of you to comment on that.
Well, from my perspective, Mark, as a keyboard player in Pantheist, but also having played in bands like Landscape, which is more like the Doors, Uriah Heep influence, that sort of thing. Really, the stuff that got me into rock and metal music is actually bands like Deep Purple and Uriah Heep. So they have a very aggressive and prominent use of keyboard. So I never thought the idea is for me to bring prettiness into the genre because of the way I got into it. Because that's the beauty about, I think, the piano and keyboards. It's such a versatile instrument. You can actually do anything with it. You can use it, to play really beautiful, fine, sensitive ballads. But you can use it really. Listen to one of my, as you know, Mark, from our previous interview, one of my big idols is Ludwig van Beethoven. I just love the way he pounds on the piano. Some of these sonatas, it's really super aggressive. So that was my impression of music. So I never thought this idea, and it's a bit sexist, this idea that come into the metal genre. I think you just have the girl in the corner playing, with 2 fingers like octaves on the keyboard. I mean,
thing about women. To be clear, I never heard anything about the women keyboard players. I think keyboards. You introduced the feminine aspect of that question.
I did, because it's such a funny cliche, isn't it? Like you bring the girl on stage to play the keyboards or the flute or something like that. But really, it's also so stereotypes, I think. And for me, the keyboard can be as. I mean, we have a keyboard player here in a band where I think the keyboards are quite bleak. Evoken. One of the things I always liked from the use of keyboards, it enhances that it doesn't necessarily, it brings some light to it, but I wouldn't say it brings necessarily beauty to it. It enhances the emotion which is already there, which is quite dark and really brooding, and you can really feel the power. I don't know, maybe Don has a different view, being from the inside.
No, I mean, I never looked at it. My musical influences, like my biggest influence is Gary Newman. I don't know if you remember him. He's got more than one song, by the way. The world would not want you to believe that, but he does.
How many bands do we have to justify that, though? I've often worried about bands who are so famous. Like, the one that I find the most upsetting, we're derailing here, but Aerosmith. How galling must it be to be in Aerosmith and have written just this enormous catalogue of great rock songs, and to only be remembered by 99% of the public for "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing"?
Yeah.
I think that would be the most galling. Don, you make a great point. Please continue about Gary Newman.
Yeah, so I mean, I could go from Gary Newman to Merzbow and different things, because I like a lot of different genres, and that's samples. And to me, samples and keyboards are all interlaced. So to me, I always saw, I don't know if I'm staying on tangent with what you're saying, but I never saw keyboards as exclusively really, because you can, even in Doom, you can make them sound horrific if you use if you layer samples and things and have absolutely no, I mean, there's a tone there, but noises. I've used like my dog barking, that my, rest in peace, my girl, but as like an undertone of one of the samples. You would never know it's a dog barking because I've mutated it so much, but it sounds pretty ugly, but but then I do a lot, I know, and I hate to use the word doomed, but I've been doomed, and I've heard people say about my playing, they're not crazy about it because it's a little more lush and melodic than the previous keyboard players. But what am I going to do? Play what someone else did to satisfy that one album from 2000, or am I going to play what I feel inside? Okay, so, but answer your question, I think you can do something as dirty and abrasive as Merzbow. Okay, and I'm sure a lot of his anger probably comes from, I'm just speculating, from him being a vegan, and I'm telling, he's got many albums that are just, you know what I'm talking about. So, but then you can go to like the beautiful, anything like my classical hero is Gabriel Fauré. I love French romantic music, and that may be why you hear a lot of. I try to do uplifting melodies and harmonies and Evoken now. I'm not like heavenly, but like more like oh, I wasn't expecting that. More than like following what the bass and the guitars do, which is you're just part of the chord progression. I like to keep the structure of the chord progression and then add a note that kind of soars above and makes you feel like, wow, I'm listening to something that's a little different. Hopefully that's what then, this band does, and this band does, and this band does. And I know some people don't like that because they like to hear the same things that make them comfortable. But but I think beauty and that's the beauty of keyboards. You can make them sound like anything, ugly, beautiful, and whatever the song is that you're working on, you cater to it and make it work. So I don't know if that answered your question. That's my feeling.
Interesting.
No, definitely. And you bring me to another important point, I think, Don, that I wanted to discuss today, because it's all about the context, isn't it? It's like you say, I mean, interestingly, my music is not as extreme as Evoken, if you like. But actually, I think that what I'm playing is quite aggressive, but the music you play is more extreme, but actually the way you described it, you almost add something beautiful. So it's all about the context, really, isn't it? It's no as clear cut, which really brings me to the point that that's how I started. We started this interview, really, this discussion rather in the beginning. That, in my view, there's no such thing as depressing music, because that's the context that we give to music. We decide that something is depressing because of our emotions and our background and our history. And I think you and both of you gave some good examples today. Mark, you mentioned earlier how sometimes when you play music, what can move you is when you kind of can connect to some experience. Suddenly, you start to sort of to get into, and then because the music transports you to that experience, then you get the feeling that you felt then. And Don, you mentioned earlier how being a vegan, that anger that comes out on stage, which, as Mark rightfully remarked, is quite unrelated. It's not necessarily inherent to the music that he plays, but it comes out because in that context it allows you to express yourself, as we said earlier, about catharsis and all that. So I don't know I would like to hear what both of you are thinking, but in my view, the sort of, when we talk about depressing, what is depressing is the context, really. It's about us stumbling on. For instance, sometimes you can have a very happy song, but if the context in which you remember the song is a very traumatic experience you had when the song was playing in the background, it might actually trigger really very negative feelings. And likewise, when I'm hearing when we're talking about super depressing music, all I'm thinking is a concert where I went to see Evoken, and it makes me ecstatic to hear, or Skepticism, and I hear these chords, I'm like, wow, I still remember the emotions, and it gives me such a positive feeling. What is your view about that? Do you think there is something as inherent depressing music, or is that really you sort of relating to some experience or an episode of your life that makes it something depressing?
I think one of the things I've often been fascinated about, and I wrote about this quite a lot when I was doing my PhD, which makes me sound like an ultimate geek, is that how music is presented and how music is received are two entirely separate things. And how a listener interprets a song is almost entirely on them, because the particularly when you're dealing with a style of music where you might not be able to understand the lyrics, what the original intent behind the composer is and how the listener interprets it they're two separate things. So the notion that there could be such a thing as depressing music doesn't make any sense to me, because it might be depressing to the writer, but the listener might hear something uplifting in it, and vice versa. And so we interpret music how we hear it, we receive it how we hear it. And how many times have we heard songwriters talk about not wanting to put the lyrics in the artwork because they want to hear the listener's interpretation? They want people to have what it means for them. And sometimes you have sort of classic bands being interviewed and being asked to finally reveal what a song was about, and they're like, no, it's whatever the listener wants. So I think there's two separate things, which means to me there can't be such a thing as depressing music. So I don't know what Dom thinks.
Yeah, no, I think it's open to individual interpretation. I mean, it's art. You can't tell someone like how to perceive it. That's the beauty of it. It's the freedom of interpreting it the way you want to, how it fits into your life. I mean, that's the way I see it. I mean, and I was just thinking about this. I don't know if you were, but I was thinking about this while we were talking about this. It's just like the genre one of the genres I'm involved with, doom metal, is like almost, we're kind of cursed because the name of the genre is so negative. So it's like automatically makes your mind go towards the negative, even though it may not always be supposed to be negative. So just the title alone is kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of a bummer.
And then,
it's
then just to make sure we put the word funeral on the front of it.
And that doesn't help. So it's kind of like, how can you tell me your music isn't negative? Look at the name. So, but yeah, I think it's all interpretation.
Death metal bands must have the same problem. But I remember, if my mom ever sees this interview, she might remember this. But when I was a teenager, I saw Megadeth on Top of the Pops which is for Don. Don is the I just pulled my headphones out. For Don is the UK chart show, and it used to be on every week, like the top 40 kind of thing. And when Megadeth were on, they were doing, I think it was Symphony to Destruction or Countdown to Extinction or something. And I was like, I was 14, 15-year-old. God, this is great. And I remember my mum saying to me, but they're called Megadeth. That's like saying death is mega.
Yeah, I can definitely see from an outsider how weird it must be, isn't it? Yeah, listening to that sort of stuff, Megadeth and Slayer and doom metal and funeral doom metal. God beware. There's even a genre called depressive black metal. Actually, they call it like that, sort of, a lot of people. So, yeah, I guess for an outsider, it can be a strange world to be in. But for us being inside it, I think we know that, and I think this discussion has shown that it's not a negative experience for to experience, to play and to listen to this music. It is actually a positive, uplifting experience. We are normal people to some extent. I think all of us, we just do social stuff in our day-to-day lives. We have our passions. We have a wide range of music that we listen to, all of us. I know Don is a massive fan of Prince, and Mark, I know you've worked with the most, from anything from Steps to Manowar. So you obviously you have a very wide musical range, and so do I. I mean, I listen to traditional Greek Rebetika music as much as I listen to funeral doom or classical music or anything you want, really. So, and I think for me that brings the point. From the moment you love music, you kind of shape it to what you want, isn't it? It's an extension to the things that you do. So your mood, you kind of determine, what you're gonna put into the music, what mood you're gonna do. It's something that you have inside you. It's not that the music brings to you. The music, it's almost like you are projecting things to the music. It's not the music that is projecting things to you. That's how I'm looking at it. I'm aware of the time. We said we're gonna be about 30 minutes. It's about 35 minutes. I always knew it was gonna be a very interesting discussion. So I'm not surprised that it lasted a bit longer than we thought. And my last thoughts that I want to share, and I want to hear from you regarding this topic, is that some people are wired a bit differently, and I think we may be some of these people. In the sense that we listen to music that actually a lot of people will probably think, "Oh, that's too negative. I cannot listen to depressing," but we don't get the same feeling, and it's just purely how our brains are wired. And that brings me to the point that I think there's so much music out there as there are people. And music is such an immersive experience. It's one of the few things that actually involves the whole brain, doesn't it? If you look at the brain imaging, when we listen to music, the whole thing lights up like like a Christmas tree, and there's no many experiences that have that effect on the brain. And not just the brain, I believe. And I think the more we know and study this, the more we're going to see other parts of the body are involved. I mean, people feel it in the gut. People start, they're telling me, I asked that question in my Facebook group earlier. Some people say their feet start moving automatically when they listen to a beat. And also, it's such a physical experience. So therefore, we all always going to experience it in very different ways. So I think we're just all wired differently. And that's why there's so much wonderful, different, diverse music out there for everyone. Just your thoughts on the matter?
Absolutely. I don't think you could sum it up any better, Kostas. It's very much an individual thing, isn't it? Music. It's so primal. It's so human. It's so deeply rooted in our souls, and we feel it how we feel it. We experience it how we experience it. And I'll always be fascinated by the fact that two people can agree completely on 100 bands and then vehemently disagree on the 101st, because it's just personal taste. At the end of the day, we hear it how we hear it. We feel it how we feel it. And I think it's one of the great things about music and great things about piano, in that we can, as Don said, the keyboard can be used in so many different ways for so many different effects, and long may it be so. So yeah, absolutely.
Totally, yes. And Don, would you like to add anything to this point?
No, I just think that it just depressing music, whatever you want to call it, really. I mean, sometimes people have to they hear this music and they have to listen to it, and sometimes it's cathartic. It gets out some of the demons that have been bothering them, So if anything, it's a positive thing. I really think it's a positive thing, because if you just listen to happy music when you feel horrible and you're not focusing on emotion, that's an emotion, but it's kind of a shallow one. It's kind of, but if you focus more on something that's a little more introspective sounding, and maybe that can get you through a hard time because you're focusing on it and not ignoring it and put it to the side and just, drinking to oblivion to you know what I mean? Like just trying to, drink your cares away. You know what I mean? So I don't know. So I think depressing quote music can be very positive actually. So that's all I have to say.
That's a good way to finish this, I think, Kostas. And Don, thank you so much for your contributions. Thank Kostas for leading us through this discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion and is enjoying World Piano Day and the World Piano 88 event on Clubhouse. Obviously, we hope we can take these discussions forward. And I would encourage you, if you've heard anything that you think, it might be interesting to try that music, then please do try out Pantheist and Evoken. And you never know, you might find something positive in there that you didn't expect. Thank you so much to both of you for your contributions. Until next time, take care.
Cheers. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.